everybody. Once upon a time, anybody looking for a sports car that offered value for money, new or used, would automatically turn towards the Japanese. There would be something that gave you a lot more for your yen than you get in dollars, pounds, or lira. However, today, that is no longer the case. New, you have fairly slim pickings. The Honda NSX and Nissan GTR both cost an awful lot more than their previous iterations, and now, in the UK at least, are discontinued. The MX-5 still soldiers bravely on, but for many simply doesn't provide the fireworks required. Mitsubishi have withdrawn from the UK market entirely. Subaru do not currently sell a spicy version of the Impreza. The BRZ you cannot get here, and its sister, the Toyota GR86, sold out in just 90 minutes because very few of them will be landing on our shores. Look to the past and it's even worse. A good example of a late Skyline R34 GTR could cost you the same as a Ferrari Roma. For the vast majority of people, I can easily understand why it would now feel like a classic Japanese sports car will be forever out of reach. However, today, I'm shining a light on a car that here in Britain has been somewhat overlooked for the last 2 decades, yet still has many fine qualities and can be had for what now is somewhat reasonable money. This is a second generation 1987 Mazda RX-7, and today I'm going to be telling you why not only is this the dream car of its 21-year-old owner, but why I also think it's something of a hidden gem. Researching the RX-7 is very, very difficult. To my mind, this should be a third generation car. If it followed the same naming scheme as other Mazdas, so the MX-5 for example, first gen, NA, second, MB, so on and so forth, this should be the third gen. And in some ways it sort of is, but really it's the second generation car. The very first had the codename SA22, then it became the FB, this second generation car is the FC, and the one most people remember, the swoopy twin turbo thing, is the FD. Just to make matters even more confusing, there are also series designations. So despite this being the first of the second generation cars, it's a Series 4. This was on sale from 1985 till about 1988. The Series 5, which I suppose you'd call the facelift of this generation, was then on sale until about 1992 when it was replaced by the FD. And if that wasn't bad enough, you also had an EFNI badged version of the car, which also had its own series designations independent of those of the main model. But let's set that all aside, shall we, and just talk about what we've got here today. This is a 1987 car, Series 4, a UK specified example, which today is a very rare thing to find. All in, Mazda made just over 270,000 of these second generation RX-7s. And while they certainly sold them here, as you can tell, we were never the intended market. Instead, these cars were mostly popular at home in Japan, but more importantly, in the then burgeoning market that was North America. It is for that reason that the second generation RX-7 was a bigger, larger, more luxurious vehicle than its predecessor, which was a more focused affair, that being more pure sports car, this having elements of GT. That being said, this also has some real niceties, like a fully independent rear suspension versus the live axle of the old one. You also saw the introduction of the now famous 13B, the twin-rotor 1.3-litre Mazda engine. It was available as both a naturally aspirated or turbo car. This one is a naturally aspirated version, which I believe was the only one available to the UK market at the time. Though it may look like a Porsche 944 clone, the RX-7 has more than enough to make it stand out as a fine car in its own right. Why then is it that a 21-year-old's dream car is a Mazda from the 1980s? As ever, the answer is video games. Just like for myself, it was the original Gran Turismo that sparked many a passion. For George, it was Need for Speed Carbon. The 2006 racer features as one of its starter cars an RX-8. And it was that got George started on the path to Rotary obsession. Years later, he started playing Forza and wanted to build a Porsche 944, however found there wasn't one in that game. But there was an FC Generation RX-7. The memories of having that car in Need for Speed were reignited, and he decided to replicate in the real world the car he built in the video games. That, I think, is fantastic. Anyone out there that poo-poos video games really shouldn't, because those today, I think, are more responsible for getting young people into cars than just about anything else. As is tradition with Japanese cars, this one is not entirely standard. In the couple of years that he's had it, George has done a fair few things, so I'm going to let VoiceOver JM talk you through those.
The car wears a subtle body kit comprising of splitter, spoiler and side skirts, but this was actually a factory fit item. Not factory are the Workmeister 16-inch split rim alloys shod with Nankang tyres. The suspension is BC Racing adjustable coilovers paired with Racing Beat camber adjusters for extra camber and a toe delete that removes an element of passive steer from the rear suspension. The exhaust is a Racing Beat True Dual, complete with silencers but without cats. There are also some subtle visual modifications like the US spec lights, and inside the major change is the fitment of a Mazda Speed steering wheel.
All in then, a modestly modified car, I would say. There are, however, 3 things this car never had. First being air conditioning, and on a day like today, I'm really not going to miss that. Another being power steering. We'll get onto that in a little bit. And the third being ABS. That I really would appreciate when it's just 1 degree outside and the roads are somewhat treacherous. I wasn't actually sure George would want to go through with this review, though it is dry and sunny today. As you can also tell, it is absolutely freezing. Grip on the roads is better than you would expect, and these Nankang tyres actually do a very impressive job of holding on to it. He is just 21, and naturally as a 21-year-old drove this car in a more gung-ho fashion than I'm going to, but true to his word, it actually gripped really well. At no point did the car break free. It felt pretty sure-footed at all times. This is one reason I think, certainly for a young driver, the naturally aspirated version of these is the car to have. Sure, there isn't a lot of power. Originally, these would have put out about 150 horses. This one now, with the exhaust, allegedly some 170. A few people with the same system have dyno tested theirs, and that, I'm told, is the figure that they get. Torque, well, I don't know a number, but it's never been a strong point of the Rotary engine. And to be honest, while I'm sure that would frustrate some, on a day like today, what you actually wind up with is a car that has far more chassis, tyres and brakes than it does engine. And I'm quite happy with that. Were this a turbo example, I would have almost certainly cancelled today's review. Old school turbocharged cars like the 944 and of course the RX-7 don't have the smoothest of power delivery. Even the later RX-7 FD with its twin turbo setup, you get to about 3,500 RPM, that second turbo kicks in, and when it's dry it can be a little bit hair raising. In these conditions it'd simply be lethal. But this is smooth, linear, predictable, and it means once you've built a little bit of trust with the car and the road, you can still have fun. Compared with a 944, it feels like a fairly spacious cabin too. The rear seats are equally as useless. The proportions of this car do feel slightly different. I'd say this has the air of being a wider, lower car. The 944 slightly narrower and taller. How true that actually is, I don't really care, but that's the impression this gives you. You do feel just that much lower down in it. I really like it. Visibility is also excellent, other than in that corner over there where the very, very chunky combined B and C pillar does obscure things a touch. However, the A pillar is typically thin, as you get in all cars of the period, and courtesy of the big drift-style mirror you've got up here, you've got a near panoramic view of everything behind you. The instrumentation is also clear, easy to read, classic 1980s orange text on black dials, and I really quite like it. You may have also on occasion heard the little beep that you get when you're supposed to change up at about 7,000 RPM. I am told that the engine will happily go beyond that to about 8, but today I'm not going to bother. It's not my car and there's really nothing to be gained from it. The exhaust isn't even anywhere near as antisocial as I feared it might be. It's quite well judged. Lift off suddenly and it'd also give you a little bit of a pop. Even in first there, foot flat to the floor, this car did not want to break traction. 245 section tyres, clearly far more than this needs. Still going to exercise caution on those corners though. You know what though? It does move, this thing. It may be a little heavier than the car that preceded it, but it's also a little lighter than a 944 or 968. These are some 1,250 kilos. Okay then, let's talk steering. At low speeds, the lack of assistance combined with the chunkier and grippier tyres than originally fitted mean that doing this sort of stuff is quite hard work. That, I'm told, is why the original owner sold it. He'd got to about 80 and just couldn't deal with it anymore. There was a second owner between him and George, meaning he's only the third owner of this car in about 35 years. That's very cool. And in fact, the whole thing is very cool, isn't it? In the States, you see these a little bit more, but here, I cannot remember ever seeing this generation of RX-7 in the wild. Even the FD is a relative rarity. I expect low numbers were a combination of Mazda not really being a particularly desirable brand at the time, certainly for a sports car, the thirst of the Rotary engine, we'll get onto that, and the fact that here in Britain we do like to chuck salt onto the roads, something the Japanese do not do and therefore don't really worry about protecting their cars against. As a result, I'm told there could be as few as 100 of these still on British roads, and I expect a good number of them did not start their life here. I'm getting ahead of myself though. I was talking to you about the steering. Sure, at low speeds it makes things hard work, but at higher speeds it's an absolute joy. Becomes a little bit lighter, though remains at all times a certain heft to it, and it's joyous. I think even better than that in the 968, which is already very, very good. The car is easy to place. It's not very big. Sure, you have useless back seats in here, but no one really uses them. Instead, what you do is fold them down and treat this as a two-seater with a lot of stowage back there. Brake feel is pretty good, and that honestly is the only thing I feel qualified to comment on. On a day like today, I'm never going to be able to tell you just how good they actually are, and I've no interest in finding out how this car behaves when you have locked a wheel up. The gearbox is pretty nice, the throw fairly short, 5 speeds, and no, this will never make much of a motorway cruiser, but for driving around your average British country road, it's very, very well suited. Indicators are on the right side, as you'd expect them. Like in the Honda NSX, they're a kind of toilet handle affair. I really can't describe them any better. The wash wipe functions are handled by some odd-looking things over here that feel like some sort of 90s party game. I quite like them, and I suppose you get used to them pretty quickly. To my eyes, this also is a rare example of a car that looks fabulous in white. I think it's one of the best colours for them. I can also say the same for the wheels on this car. Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of this aftermarket looking split rim alloy, but it just suits the second gen RX-7. However, I cannot say the same for the suspension, which I am most certainly not in love with. Despite the fact it's almost all the way to its softest setting, on click 5 out of 30, it has a real constant harshness that means for this kind of road, it really isn't that pleasant. More worryingly, there have actually been a couple of bits of the road where I've scraped the chassis, not because I was going too fast, but because there's a bit of a hump in the road where two pieces join, and I've not had that happen in any other car that I've tested on the same piece of road. However, we must remember that George is 21 and therefore legally required to do somewhat inadvisable things to his car. I actually think he's demonstrated extraordinary taste with this. It would be very, very possible to go a lot further than he has, but he's resisted temptation. Some of you may imagine that's because he's run out of budget, but having spoken to him for a bit, the fact is he's got this car pretty much how he likes it, and honestly, I don't think he really needs to change all that much, suspension aside. Currently in the UK classifieds, there are very, very few of these for sale. So few, in fact, it's difficult for me to give you a price range. But if I say one of these will set you back about 10 grand, I think that's close enough to the truth. And that would be for a car you should be able to just get into and drive. Although he cannot get a classic car policy because of his age, insuring this costs just £700 for a year. And that, compared to just about anything that would appeal to most 21-year-olds, is very, very cheap. In fact, there are plenty of boring cars out there that I'm confident would cost you a lot more. It has only let him down the once, which was very soon after he'd got it. It shredded its belt. This, I'm told, is a very common thing for these. he has replaced the stock system with a toothed belt and an uprated alternator. Curiously for a Japanese car, it in fact seems to be the electrical systems that are causing him the greatest concern. For some apparent reason, despite the fact the car is used fairly regularly and charged often, about every 3 months it will knacker a battery, and as of yet he's been unable to discover why. If you're a member of the RX-7 community and you've got an idea, please hop into the comment section down below and let us know. That aside, servicing wasn't particularly cheap. While he's owned it, this car has been serviced by Essex Rotary, and George has told me that they are absolutely fantastic. Very dedicated, passionate people who know these cars inside out and are a joy to deal with. It's really important there are businesses out there that not just do the work, but are also nice to deal with. It's a vital part of owning a car like this. On its most recent visit to Essex Rotary, it cost about £1,800. That did include some extra work though, and the cost of the service itself was closer to about £1,300, and that was for the most in-depth service you could possibly do. Another popular modification he's performed is to remove the pump which feeds the engine with oil and instead pre-mix it when he fills up. Every tank of fuel, he sticks about 100 ml of oil in, and that does the job. Most Rotary guys in the States I know do the same, and the general consensus seems to be that is better for the car all round. Fuel economy, it won't shock you to hear, is absolutely atrocious. An exact figure we don't know, but I'd wager low 20s, maybe high teens. It drinks this thing. However, that aside, what you're left with is, to my eyes, a very good-looking, classically proportioned sports car with some GT ability, and the cool factor that should be attached to owning anything retro. Combine that with the fact that it's real fun to drive, has great steering, a 7,000 plus RPM engine, and this is a car that I think any young person would be very, very proud to own. I'd love to have one of these. It's a fantastic car and a great, really cool alternative to a 944. So that, I think, is enough for today. I want to say a huge thank you to George for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. If you've got any other alternatives for old school sports cars that would appeal to petrol heads, young and old, please let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.